Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to correct some of the misinformation that has been offered previously because I think it's important to talk about what this bill does and does not do. There were a lot of allegations that Act 120 is working and that we should give it more time to work. I assure you the residents in the 100th District that are impacted by the rising property taxes do not believe that Act 120 is working. When you look at these numbers, and I believe it's very instructive for us to do so, we have increased the CSRS general fund payments from the year 2013-14 to $933.8 million to $1.233 billion in 14-15 and $1.5 billion this upcoming year. You mirror that with the PSERS system of $1.086 billion 13-14, $1.382 billion in 14-15, and $1.7 billion this year. Mr. Speaker, that is an increase from $2 billion out of a $28.4 billion budget the entire way up to $3.2394 billion out of a $30 billion budget. This portion of our budget continues to grow. 3 short years ago, it was 7%. This year, it will nearly be 11%. When you look at the overall education funding that we provide at the state level of over $10 billion, 1.7 of that goes to fund the pension payments. The primary reason why some folks claim that Act 120 works was because of the collars. However, those collars had a substantial cost. In fact, when you total up the costs in CSRS and PSERS, you're looking at over $30 billion in cost, which is nothing more than pushing the payment ahead for my children and yours and children yet to be born to pay the bill. In my opinion, what we really have is a math problem. We have a formula that does not work and is not sustainable. If you look back to 2006, we had 102,000 people retire from the CSRS system. In 8 short years, we've increased that by nearly 20%, up to 122,000. The gentleman from Bucks correctly pointed out that the outflows are quickly outpacing the inflows, and most importantly, outpacing the ability to raise that money because we are losing principal in the system. Mr. Speaker, I would compare this to an individual who has a lot of credit card debt. We have nearly $50 billion in credit card debt. And there's really 2 options today. One is we can move them to another card through collars and artificial means, or we could make some substantive changes to the current system, stop digging the hole that we've created, and move forward. And most importantly, cut up the card to make sure that it does not happen again. We've heard a lot of talk about the legislative malpractice that has occurred in this General Assembly over the years. And you are correct. There's plenty of blame to go around on both sides and all parties. But the reality is we have an obligation to make sure that these funds are solvent. Mr. Speaker, the General Assembly may enact legislation that changes the terms of the retirement benefits to enhance the actuarial soundness of the retirement funds. This is persistent through all the case law. Mr. Speaker, when you look at the Harvey case, and quoting directly from the case, it says, the legislature may, from time to time, within the confines of that established relation, alter, change, amend, and render intact the actuarial soundness of the system so as to strengthen its fibers in any way it sees fit. Changes in detail, such as length of service required, contributions needed, age requirements to keep the fund on sound actuarial practices are essential. Further down in the same opinion, it says, a moment's reflection will indicate that all members of a retirement system, whether they actually receive pension payments, those currently retired, eligible to receive payments, or in the process of completing the requirements necessary to receive them, benefit from the maintenance of an actuarially sound retirement fund. This was reiterated and quoted again in the Catania case, where the judge writing for the majority said, nonetheless, I'm unconvinced that a pension plan is absolutely unalterable once a public employee has commenced employment and joined the retirement plan. Quoting from Allegheny County versus McGovern, he says, until the employee has earned his retirement pay or until the time arrives when he may retire, his retirement pay is but an inchoate right. But when the conditions are satisfied, at that time, retirement pay becomes a vested right of which the person entitled thereto cannot be deprived, and it is ripened into a full contractual obligation. Implicitly, at least, and I think this is important because there's a lot of talk about pensions being a contractual right. Implicitly, at least, inchoate rights are not held to come under the protection of Article 1, Section 17 of the Pennsylvania Constitution. Mr. Speaker, we have a fiduciary obligation, as a gentleman from the Mid-State pointed out earlier. I think the first rule is to cut up the credit cards, stop digging the hole, and put our system into a way that we can, one, better manage our liability, and then step two, as many of my colleagues have argued today as a reason to oppose this plan, but is really the second step of how we need to fix it, on how do you pay that bill, how do you fund that bill, and how do you go forward. Let's be clear. Without any current changes to the system, the unfunded liability will continue to grow to levels that could render both CSRS and PSRS insolvent. The changes being made in Senate Bill 1 as amended do not cause a reduction in the amount of pension accrual being earned by members of their respective plans. The employee contribution rates and the benefit accrual rates for current members are not being altered. The addition of the shared risk and shared gain provisions to both the CSRS and the PSRS codes enhances the actuarial soundness of the plan and provides a benefit to current members of the system in that if the investment returns are above the actuarially assumed rate of return, employees will directly benefit from a decrease in the employee contribution rate that they are required to pay. These changes are not retroactive and they are merely prospective. No benefits already accrued by the state or school employees will be affected by these necessary changes. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, there's been some questions regarding as the handling of the police or the FOP under this proposal. And I would highlight several main concerns, particularly with the state police. The state police do not participate in the Social Security system, which is a fundamental reason to exclude them, because they need to have a disability payment in the event of injury on the job. And we're on sound legal footing here as well in the Gary case, where it says, as we've pointed out in Baxter versus City of Philadelphia, the duties and interests protected by police are of a sufficiently distinct character from those of other governmental employees to justify different terms of employment. Mr. Speaker, this is exactly what Senate Bill 1 does. Mr. Speaker, as we look here today, I think it's incumbent upon us to reflect upon the duty that we owe to not just those who are currently in the pension systems, but to those who are also taxpayers. Mr. Speaker, the workers who were described earlier as being impacted by changes in the pension system, I can assure you they will be directly impacted if taxes are raised, whether it's the sales tax or the income tax or whatever methodology is used to backfill this hole. It is clear that the legislative power of the Commonwealth is vested in the General Assembly. It is equally clear that we have the power of the purse and appropriations. It is our duty to manage effectively. And as I said earlier, we need to stop digging this financial hole. I'd encourage a yes vote.